Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with myself. Guys, this is the first solo episode of two. There's one coming out next week, in which I talk through some of the darker periods of my life. Well, the first episode today is the rock bottom, and then episode 2 next week is how I came out of it. My hope with this story and with this share is that it might be the hope and optimism that someone else needs. Someone else maybe that's struggling, and hoping that by sharing this story, you might give that person some hope and optimism that even if things are really bad, that there's a way out. And I know how important that was for me when I was at my rock bottom, hearing other stories of how people got themselves out. So that is my hope, that someone listening who might be struggling can use this to help them get out of their dark or darker place. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Gang, what is up? Hope you're really well. I'm doing something different today. Well, I'm doing something different over the next 2 episodes. I realized that I never have really given a bit of back history or a bit of story about me, and it's not that exciting. But the reason I wanted to share it is for a couple of reasons. One, so this person that you're listening to on the podcast, you have a bit more understanding of who he is. But 2, and more importantly, one of the things I found really helpful when I was going through a struggle was using other people's stories and things that they had overcome as a tool for hope and optimism. So my hope is that with and by sharing this story, that there's someone out there who might be struggling in some way, shape, or form, and can find a level of hope and optimism, knowing that I've been to some very dark places myself and found a way out. And that can also be the catalyst and the motivation for them as they find their struggle. So if one person takes something from this, that is a massive win for me. So as I said, I'm going to break it into 2 parts. I'm going to, in the first one today, talk about my absolute capitulation, which was about a 15-month period. And in the second episode next week, talk about the rise from the capitulation, which was also about a 15-month period. So the same rate it went up at, the same rate at which I went down, I also kind of came out of it at pretty much the same rate. So hopefully, again, that provides some kind of level of optimism and hope to someone who might be in a pretty bad place and how quickly you can turn it around. So to kick it off, I guess it's worth me starting at Friday the 13th. And I remember the date specifically, June, Friday 13th, 2018. I remember the date specifically because the trustee that I had, his name was Darren, made a joke of it being Friday the 13th. And the trustee, Darren, is essentially the guy who is my big daddy for a period of time. So when you file for bankruptcy, which I'll go into in a sec, you have someone that oversees your moves. It's kind of weird, but totally understandable. So Friday the 13th was the day I filed for bankruptcy. He made a bit of a joke about it. And at that stage, I had gone through a fair bit of like processing already. So a few weeks prior to that, I had a knock at the door, and I can never say this word, so hopefully I spit it out right. But a budsman rocked up. And essentially, this is the person who comes to your front door, gives you a letter. And when I opened it, it was like this big red kind of print saying bankruptcy. So I got the letter. I'd had kind of a little bit of time to process it. And then Darren, my trustee, had taken over and would handle everything from there. And I remember kind of opening the envelope, and it was a kind of strange feeling, because part of me felt a level of like relief that the Band-Aid had finally been ripped off. and that I could, it was almost like I could take my first breath in a while because I had dug myself such a hole. For context, I had a $275,000 tax bill that I just wasn't sure how I was ever going to get out of. And I'd spoken to a few people and they're like, mate, I'd probably wave the white flag and file for bankruptcy. And I'd fought, previous to that, I'd kind of fought it for quite a while. I think I'd fought it for 18 months and I just could not get myself out of the hole. So there was a sense of relief, but also I was completely like shattered, embarrassed, carried so much shame around the fact that I had filed for bankruptcy. Someone who carries a lot of like pride in what he does and puts a lot of effort and time into his own development and business, etc. And somehow I'd ended up here. So there was a lot of shame that had happened. So he'd rocked up to the door. I'd received a letter. I think my girlfriend was at home at the time, former girlfriend. And I just kind of shared the news with her and no one else. I could not bring myself to share the news with anyone else, which is a lot of weight for her. And there's a lot of the story that she carried a lot of the weight of because of the level of shame and guilt and judgment and everything that I had, which in hindsight, totally unfair to her. I just didn't know better at the time and didn't feel okay sharing my story with other people. So 6 months prior to that, I'd studied NLP. For those that don't know that, that's neuro-linguistic programming. And it was the first time that I really started to want to, on a much deeper level, explore my kind of inner world. Prior to that, I'd obviously been in the fitness space for so long and it was all that kind of surface level, go hard, go home. Like I didn't really know myself. So doing NLP really felt like the start of proper personal development from a like introspection, reflection point of view. Up until that point, I feel like my personal development was very knowledge mastery and not self-mastery. And what I mean by that is I'd spent so many years doing the courses, listening to the podcasts, etc., but I hadn't really understood myself at all. So NLP was the first time that it really started to like turn inwards. And over the last, 7 years? That's my timeline. 7 years. There's been a hell of a lot more internal work than there has like podcast, books, etc. And if I had my time again, and my recommendation to anyone who's on this personal development path would be like, do a lot more self-mastery and self-understanding than kind of knowledge mastery. So anyway, between the filing for bankruptcy and the NLP, I really wanted to start to like make sense of how did I get here? And on the surface level, it's really obvious, bro, you've got a $275,000 tax bill that you can't pay off. But if I couldn't make sense of like my own inner world, my own beliefs, my own behaviors as how I got there, I left myself open and vulnerable to potentially getting there again. So it really opened a can of worms. And I would say that can of worms is still open. I still, through observation and through conversations and through healing and coaching, I still see myself with numerous patterns that aren't completely cleared. And for context, I have a Google Doc, a running Google Doc of where I've really recorded all my like money stuff. And at time of recording of this, there's 124 things that I've written that I can see having a negative and detrimental impact on my finances. It's quite a few. And if I'm honest, probably over the last 18 months, I haven't been as dialed in with writing them all down. So I would say it's more than that. I'd say it's up around kind of 140, 150. Now you can imagine if you've got 140, 150 limiting beliefs, behaviors, habits, etc., that are negative in one area of your life, you're probably going to fuck things up. So that's been really interesting for me as well. So it was really interesting to go through this. And at the time, that was a rock bottom for me, like bankruptcy. And over the last kind of, I can't work out the timeline, I think it's 6 years now since this happened, 7 years. It's been really interesting with the people that know my story to have some of these conversations. And I tend to think this is more a male thing because males hold themselves with kind of more pride and often ego around their careers. But there's blokes that have committed suicide once they've gone bankrupt or with the potential of going bankrupt. Like there's people that have such ego and such pride that they would rather end their life than declare bankruptcy. And I went through some dark periods. Bankruptcy was just one element of it, but it really does hit you hard. So at the age of, what was I at the time? 34, and just paralyzing shame, guilt, judgment, fear, embarrassment, everything you could think of. That ended up being the first domino of a huge amount of dominoes to fall. Interestingly, for those that want to know about bankruptcy, I was okay to continue business. So I literally opened the next day as a sole trader instead of a company, which is what I had at the time. But at the point of this, which was, what I say, June, the whole fitness business element for me had been well and truly dead and buried for probably 9 months previously. Really fortunate to absolutely love the health and fitness space for 12 years. But in that 13th year, it had died. So not only was my business starting to kind of deteriorate quickly, because so many people could tell I wasn't interested in it anymore, but then the bankruptcy came. Anyway, I opened the doors next day as a sole trader. But this was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of like, I've got to get out of here. I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't even want to be in Sydney. I felt like my time was up. And 3 months later, June, July, August, September, 3 months later, my girlfriend at the time and I packed up and left Sydney. I was looking for a new change and she was very kind to follow suit. On my way down to Melbourne, so we're moving to Melbourne, I did a 10-day Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I have no idea and no real recollection of what came up for me in that 10 days. I've got it journaled down somewhere. I remember it. You're not meant to journal, but I took a journaling. But I just remember 28, 29 pages of pure gold coming out of me in that 10 days. And what was really interesting is not a single moment or image or memory of my fitness business. And that was really a confirmation for me that my time in the fitness space was done. Now, I've been very fortunate that I knew from the age of 18 what I wanted to do, and that was be in the fitness space. And now I was in a space where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was 33 at the time, 33, 34. And I just filed for bankruptcy. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I needed a change. So we moved to Melbourne. And I was very lucky to be offered a job at the F45 South Yarra at the time by a guy called Michael Ramsey, who is a mate of mine. And I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do, but I had somehow convinced myself that it was exciting and a great opportunity. And in hindsight, probably a little bit of ego as well. So I think it was like the number one F45 at the time, and I was going to be manager there. So it was, at a time where I was really flat and really down on myself. It almost looked like this little ego booster that propped me up for a period of time. Anyway, I got there. I don't know how long it was before I got fired, but I got fired from there. And I remember at the time really like blaming Ramsey for it. And interestingly, I held on to that for quite a while. Like, oh, it's his fault. When that's just pure ego and like wounded little boy energy. But he actually moved up to Byron and he was living next door to me. And this is when Shani and I were in Europe, and I found out this and I was like, okay, this is a perfect time to make amends and apologize for being shit, essentially. So I sent him a voice message. I was like, hey, mate, I know a lot of kind of waters under the bridge since, and I know you've moved in next door. I just want to apologize for my poor performance managing your gyms. And he was, it's kind of water off a duck's back to him. He's like, mate, compared to some of the other stuff I've been through, it's nothing. So that was nice to kind of heal that. And, we bump into each other a bit now. So I left there, Ramsey, fuck, like all the chat that any kind of victim could possibly push forward. And then I went to BFT Port Melbourne. And not long after that, got fired from there as well. And I have no idea because I was in such a place of pain. I have no idea how I would have been perceived by Ramsey, by the guys who ran Port Melbourne BFT, or even by like the members. Like there was such a level of disconnection that I had no idea what was going on. And even really, I've never kind of really spoken in detail, I guess, with my ex as to like how I was perceived by her at that time. But I was flat. Like I was the definition of flat. And it came to a point where it was just too much for my ex-partner. Bankruptcy, lack of direction, no money, fired from 2 jobs, like not really going anywhere, if we're honest. And I think it was around April that her and I parted ways. And it had gone from kind of September when I left Sydney through to April. So we're kind of looking at 8 or 9 months later. And I've now bankruptcy, been fired from 2 jobs. And even though I grew up in Melbourne, I don't have a huge connection to Melbourne anymore. I've got some friends, and I've probably got more friends now than I did 6 years ago when this was happening in Melbourne. But I was feeling really lonely in Melbourne. So no friends to add to the no purpose, no money. I don't think I had a car at the time. Yeah, I didn't have a car. And I remember when my ex left, I think her mum came to get her and they were driving back to Sydney. And I had moved out of a house that I was in previously. And I was sitting in a friend's house in, I think it was like Brighton, somewhere in Brighton. And my ex is gone. I'm there without a job, without money, without car, without kind of really many friends. And I remember this being the longest day of my life. Like each second felt excruciating. And I sat there just like numb, not even having a level of go to like work out what's next. Just no idea. And once I kind of sat in my like sulking behavior for a period of time, I was like, I'm going to go see if I can get Centrelink. And I can't remember how many Ks it was, but I had no money. So I walked to the Centrelink it's on the Nepean Highway down past Westfield for those that know. It would have been like a 5 or 6K walk. Get there, fill in the applications, and I get rejected from Centrelink. I'm like, I've got no money and I can't even get fucking Centrelink. So I slowly make my way home to my friend's house. And then I think it was the same night that she said, mate, I'm going to need you to find somewhere else to stay. And I don't know, like she had 2 kids and there was a lot going on in her house. I'll totally get it. I was like, fuck, I don't even know where to go. So I got no money, no job, can't get Centrelink, got nowhere to go. And I didn't want to go. I wasn't going to go back to Sydney. I was feeling really lonely in Melbourne. I didn't want to go back to Adelaide, where I was from. I didn't know where else to go. Anyway, I messaged a mate of mine, and he's my oldest of friends. We've been friends for 37 years. He used to be best friends with my brother. Him and I have actually become pretty close over the last 5 years. And we'd become quite close because when I was going through my stuff, he was going through his. He was going through a divorce. And I think it was like a Tuesday night. Every Tuesday night we'd go for a run. And it was like an opportunity just to kind of get the endorphins going, which when you're really flat, fuck, anything you can do to get the endorphins going is a massive win. And also we'd have like a little kind of check-in at the end. He's not into personal development. He's not into men's work or anything like that. But I think that was just the little chat was enough for him to, similar to me, get through the next day. And I remember having this, I think it was in Melbourne that this thought came up, this really dark thought of like, I get why blokes jump. like unintentionally, the pressure that I felt to make shit happen. And I understand, like, I completely understand why a girlfriend would, with good intentions, have a little bit of a nudge of like, mate, we've got to get back up and running. Like, it would have been scary at the very least. But the pressure to work out what I was doing next, the pressure to like have answers, I was like, fuck. You go out each day to work and that felt wrong for me in terms of like I just knew that I wasn't enjoying it at all. I was trying to like self-motivate, but I was just hating it. And then I'd come home and just there's no off. Like I think at the time, and I can see how this is kind of victim behavior, but when I'm like flat, I just wanted to come home and rest my head at night and not feel the pressure of the world. And I have no idea how blokes do this when they've got kids and stuff like that. Like I was looking for anywhere to hide essentially, just so I could breathe. Like the ultimate for me would have been to have some kind of man cave in the forest and go and sit there on my own for 2 weeks and try to make sense of like my thoughts and where I wanted to go next. So I was constantly in this place of like feeling pressure. And I was like, fuck, like I had that thought of it would be easier to finish it. I get why why blokes jump. And prior to that, I'd never really had suicidal thoughts or suicidal tendencies. And it shook me. Like I didn't necessarily have an answer straight after that of like, fuck, I need to go and speak to someone or whatever. But I was like, okay, this is like really serious if you're having those thoughts. I knew it was serious, but there was also a level of like disconnection and dissociation from it that I didn't until that moment realize how serious it was. So anyway, mate said I could come and stay, which fucking saved me because I had no idea where I was going to go. Like no job, no car, no money, no purpose, no friends. And I was like a couple of days away from being homeless with nowhere to go. So I went to his house. And one of the amazing things about him, he's not into the personal development work at all. In fact, he's one of my closest friends who has the least interest in it. But one of the amazing things about this bloke, and anyone who meets him says the same thing, he's absolutely amazing. And he's actually coming to Bali with us in a few weeks to celebrate my birthday, is he just had a way to check in on me, but also just let me be. And this was the first time in a long time that I'd felt like I could just be, I could just rest. I could just like release the pressure of the world for a couple of weeks. And I can't remember how long I stayed. I think I stayed at his house for a couple of weeks, but I just like, it felt like a new home. It felt like a safety net that I needed at that time to have no pressure. No one being like, hey, what are you like? Where are you going with your life? I was like, fuck, I don't know. Like, I just need a few weeks to like breathe, sleep well, and try to find some answers because I've got none at this stage. So I'll never forget how impactful that 2 weeks is. And one of the challenges is, at least to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen a book of like how to handle and how to, be by the side of someone who's struggling mentally. Like I don't know if there's an instruction manual. If there is, someone please let me know. But he just knew how to do it. And the other people that I had in my world and the other people who had like recently separated from my world, no doubt they were trying their best, but it was actually making things worse. And there was a part of me that when my relationship broke down, like I was absolutely heartbroken. There's no doubt about that. And there was also like a sense of relief of like, okay, at least that pressure's not on me anymore. And I just have to focus on getting myself out of this hole now. Like I don't have to think about anyone else. And it's like people talk about survival mode. I was deep in survival mode. I got no money, no car, the rest. So I'd applied for jobs in Melbourne, couldn't get traction. I was like, fuck, all right, I'm out of here. And I didn't know where to go. There was no way I was going back to Sydney, no way I was going to Adelaide. Had done in Melbourne. And my previous girlfriend was originally from Newcastle. And the girlfriend before that was also from Newcastle. And I developed this really amazing relationship with Newey. I kind of felt at the time that my time in the big smoke in terms of major cities was done. And I loved Byron, but for whatever reason, it didn't really cross my mind at that time. I think because I felt like a really strong connection to Newey and I kind of knew it quite well, having spent 4 years back and forth from there. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go to Newey. I'm going to give it a crack. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to give it a crack. And I moved to Newey. I can't remember how I paid for flights. I wouldn't have had any money. I moved to Newey and God bless her, one of my ex's really good friends or former friends was like, you can come and stay with me. And I have no idea even like, if anyone's been in a really dark position, you might experience this. Like a lot of it is a fog for me. I've actually got notes here. Otherwise, more of it would be a fog. I can't remember whether she must have offered her place before I even came to Newey. And she said, you can come and stay rent free, work out what you need to do, you know, get on top of life and then you can pay me. So I moved to her house and essentially lived rent free. I can't even remember for how long. Fuck, I bought her a few presents since. I need to buy a few more. But she just allowed me to stay. She's like, just do your thing. And again, she has this incredible ability to, she's got this really healthy, nurturing element to her. Like she was so nurturing at the time that I needed, and it was so healing. She just knows how to nurture. And it really, even though I was still flat, like that nurturing element from her gave me a level of like empowerment. And I'm not talking big empowerment. I'm talking enough to kind of just get up and do life a little bit. But that nurturing element from her was enough to like get me going. And over the course of, can't remember, maybe a month, I applied for over 50 jobs. I think it was 52 in the end, and went to a whole bunch of interviews. There was a lot that people thought I was overqualified for. So I went for like gym management roles and stuff like that. And they're like, mate, are you sure? And then ones that I just was underqualified for. But essentially just kept on falling through. And I eventually got a job with a group called Air Locker. And Air Locker was at the time, it's pretty well established now, but it was just starting up as a new fitness franchise. And I came in almost in a management role. Like they were really green. They didn't even have their first location. And like that absolutely saved me. And I remember that it was my first day on the job, and it was absolutely pissing down. And in my account, I've got the notes here. In my account, I had $33.08. And it was a $20 bus ride in the middle of winter to get to work. So I was like, okay, I'm down to $13.08. I was like, I cannot go to work drenched. So I bought an umbrella for $10. So I've literally got the bank receipt here. So on my first day of work, I've got $3.08 to my name. And they had a fortnightly pay roster. I was like, I'm 2 weeks away from getting any money and I've got $3.08. I think at the time I had some rice and tuna, but I was like, things were really grim. And I thought, fuck it, I'm going to try my luck. I'm going to ask if I can get paid weekly because I think I could probably get through on like rice and tuna for the next week if I had to. And they allowed it to happen. So for the next 2 months, I actually had quite a lot of fun with the guys in just doing a whole bunch of like different jobs within Air Locker. And then I got fired from those guys. So in the space of 6 months, I had been fired 3 times. I was like, oh, fuck. I really do give up. And I was like, okay, I have to go back to Adelaide now. I had no idea what I was going to do or where else I was going to go. I really felt like I was out of options. And at the time, I had felt like just about everything was stripped away from me. I had no direction, no car, no money. I felt like I didn't really have friends. Like I was going through a big transition with my friendship group. But I was kind of hanging my hat on two things. And the two things that had served me really well up until this point was mental health and physical health. And I remember saying to Genoa, the universe, can strip everything away from me, but at least I've got my mental and physical health. And God bless him. He didn't say anything, but there was no way that I had my mental health at that stage. And then a week later, I ended up in hospital with what they thought was meningococcal. And by this stage, I'd moved back to Adelaide and I'd moved in with my mum. Now, my mum and I get along okay, but living with her is not ideal for me. And God bless my brother. He was able to kind of give me some work. I was taking anything that I could get. So I spent some time as a dish pig in his cafe. I was taking some classes. I was doing kind of like, we're doing a rebrand of his gym. So I was just like scrapping it together. And then I ended up in hospital with what they thought was meningococcal. And interestingly, they never found anything. There was no, like, it was dark, but they couldn't find anything. And how this happened was I was living with my mum at the time, which is about 30 minutes away from the gym. And I woke up and I had an early gym session for my brother and woke up in this absolute pool of sweat. And by that stage, it was pretty much too late to cancel the session. So I drove to the gym. Now, I've got my brother's car because I didn't have a car at the time. And it was probably right up there with the scariest 30 minutes of my life. And the reason for that is whatever had come over me was affecting my eyesight. So my eyesight was like blurry. And then I was having these like black spots come across my eyes. There's no way I should have driven. And I got to the gym. For whatever reason, I found it hard to even sit up. So I was lying on the floor when everyone's coming into the gym. And I was like, guys, I'm going to try to get someone to fill in. I can't function. And someone came and got me. So someone came and took over me. And then from there, I drove home again. Same thing, blurry vision, eyes are doing all types of things. And I definitely shouldn't be driving. Got back into bed and then mum called the doctor at, I think it was like lunchtime, and we kind of went into hospital. And then for the next 3 days, I kind of slept 16 hours a day and was that was like me stripped bare. So from the start of this all happening, which was June 13, 2018, to the moment when I got like meningococcal, well, what they thought was meningococcal, and me bottoming out on September 15, it was the 15-month like ultimate capitulation to the point where I was like, okay, I don't know what else to do, so I'm going to give up. Now, the way that I look at that now is more a case of like, okay, I'm going to surrender. But at the time, it felt like giving up. I was like, I don't know. I'm out. I'm out of ideas. And then a week later, and after an ayahuasca ceremony, things started to turn around. And that's when the first idea around momentum kind of came through. So from the 15 months down. I'll leave you there. And next week, we'll talk about bouncing back from the bottom.